Vienna, October 1994. A cold night that would rewrite the rules of international espionage forever. The golden lights of the Vienna State Opera illuminate hundreds of elegant figures emerging from a Mahler concert, Symphony No. 5, the kind that draws sighs even from the most skeptical. Among tuxedos and evening gowns, a man in a gray suit descends the marble staircase with the confidence of someone who believes Central Europe is his untouchable sanctuary. But there's something he doesn't know. His final steps are being counted. Israeli intelligence has already determined that tonight will be his last act. The ambient sound blends elegant conversations, footsteps echoing in the cold. And suddenly, a muffled gunshot cuts through the air like a dissonant note in a perfect orchestra. Who was this man who firmly believed Austria would protect him? And why did Mossad cross diplomatic borders, risk international crisis, and mount a surgically precise operation just to eliminate him on an opera night? If you love stories like this, based on true events, packed with espionage, secret operations, and unsolved mysteries, hit that like button right now so this video reaches more people. Your interaction massively helps the channel grow. And trust me, what you're about to discover will change how you see modern warfare forever. Chapter 1. The Ghost Financier. The answer involves millions of dollars, hidden financial networks, and an invisible war fought in the shadows of civilized Europe. Throughout this story, you'll discover who Tariq al-Rifi was, how his financial network moved fortunes for Hamas while he sipped coffee in Vienna, how Mossad tracked his every move for months, the chilling details of his execution outside the Vienna State Opera, and the strategic impact that completely redefined counterintelligence operations on European soil. This story involves infiltration, fake passports, elite snipers trained by Sayeret Matkal, and decisions made in rooms where no camera has ever entered. But before we get to Operation Concerto itself, you need to understand who the man at the center of this web truly was. Tariq Mansour al-Rifi was 42 years old when he was killed that night in Vienna. But his story began far from those European lights. He was born in Nablus, Palestinian territory, at a time when seeing Israeli tanks in the streets was as common as watching the sunrise. He grew up breathing tension, watching neighbors get arrested, hearing stories of resistance at the dinner table. When it was time to study, he went to Cairo to pursue economics, and it was there, in Egyptian universities during the 1970s, that he came into contact with the Muslim Brotherhood, that ideological melting pot that shaped entire generations of activists and militants. But Tariq wasn't the type to take up arms. He realized early on there was a much more sophisticated, and in his view, much more powerful battlefield: money. While others dreamed of attacks and martyrdom, he dreamed of untraceable financial flows. Tariq's philosophy was almost elegant in its brutal simplicity. True power doesn't lie in weapons, but in the flow of money that buys those weapons, trains the fighters, pays the families, and keeps the structure alive. Influenced by pan-Islamic thinkers and fascinated by decentralized strategies of asymmetric warfare, he became an expert in creating, and above all, concealing, financial networks for organizations the West labeled terrorist. Tariq functioned as Hamas's unofficial finance minister, a position that didn't officially exist, but which everyone at the top knew was vital. He operated between Vienna, Frankfurt, and Zurich, moving funds with the same ease as transferring money between bank accounts. Except he triangulated operations across 3 continents, recruited sympathizers at European universities, and maintained political contacts while disguised as a respectable diplomat and academic. His operations financed dozens of attacks throughout the 1990s, especially suicide bombings on Israeli buses and cafés. Beyond providing logistics, explosives, training, and escape routes, Tariq was the key figure in Hamas's European expansion, the continent he considered his strategic rear guard. In closed circles, he wore the confident smile of someone who felt untouchable. He used to say, "Europe is our rear guard. They will never suspect. There, we are untouchable." Elegant and articulate, he spoke Arabic, English, and French fluently. When he entered a Swiss bank, he was mistaken for a legitimate diplomat. He possessed 3 perfect identities: Jordanian, Tunisian, and Yemeni passports, none of which raised red flags at customs. But all this excessive confidence, this sense of invincibility that neutral Europe gave him, would prove to be precisely his downfall. And Mossad was about to prove that no one, absolutely no one, was too far away to be reached. Chapter 2. Europe's Dangerous Neutrality. The year 1994 was one of those historic moments when the entire world seemed to believe peace had finally arrived in the Middle East. The Oslo Accord still had that fresh ink smell. Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat had shaken hands in public, and Western news outlets celebrated the end of decades of conflict. But while diplomats toasted with champagne in European ballrooms, an opposing force was growing in the shadows. Hamas categorically rejected any negotiation, viewed Oslo as betrayal, and prepared to prove that armed resistance was far from over. It was the perfect scenario for men like Tariq al-Riffi to thrive. Because when there's hope for peace on the surface, no one pays enough attention to the war that continues to be financed under the table. Europe, especially Austria, became a dangerous gray zone in this geopolitical chess match. Austrian neutrality had been almost sacred since the Cold War, and Swiss and Austrian banking secrecy created the perfect environment for financial operations nobody wanted to investigate thoroughly. Mosques in Vienna and NGOs with pleasant names like Humanitarian Assistance Fund and Islamic Cultural Centers became veritable hubs for fundraising. Small donations that, added together, moved millions. Central Europe became the financial heart of a network supplying terrorist cells from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. While European authorities turned a blind eye, fearing accusations of Islamophobia or out of genuine naivety, Israeli intelligence watched in horror as money flowed freely from Frankfurt to Amman, from Vienna to Gaza, financing explosives and military training. Tariq al-Riffi stood at the center of this machine, like a conductor leading a sinister orchestra. In just 3 years, he executed financial operations moving more than $30 million. A fortune at the time, especially considering much of this money came from small legal donations that were consolidated and redirected. He created elaborate routes. Money left Vienna as donations to NGOs, passed through banks in Zurich, transferred to accounts in Amman, and finally arrived in Gaza through smugglers on the Egyptian border. This $30 million financed dozens of suicide bombings, purchased weapons, paid martyrs' families, and kept logistical cells functioning perfectly. Tariq had transformed terrorist financing into an exact science, and Europe was his favorite laboratory. Israel began noticing a chilling pattern. While the defense forces fought militants in southern Lebanon and Gaza, while Shin Bet arrested suspects in the West Bank, the very lifeblood of Hamas, its financial system, was being comfortably fueled in European countries that didn't want to get involved. It was like trying to extinguish a fire while someone far away kept throwing gasoline on it. Western governments reacted with timid sanctions, investigations that dragged on for years, and bureaucracy that protected more than it exposed. The frustration in Tel Aviv was palpable. Fighting the enemy on the battlefield was useless if they were receiving cash transfusions from Viennese cafés and German mosques. Something needed to change, and fast. For Mossad, Tariq al-Riffi wasn't just another terror banker. He was the man who made it all possible, the main vein feeding the terrorist infrastructure with fresh blood. Eliminating him would mean cutting off the supply, causing temporary collapse in the financing network, and sending a crystal-clear message to anyone thinking of using European neutrality as a shield. There is no safe haven when you finance the deaths of Israeli civilians. The decision was made at the highest levels. Tariq needed to be eliminated, and it needed to happen on European soil to prove a point diplomacy could never achieve. But executing such an operation in Austria without causing an international diplomatic crisis would require surgical planning. And that's exactly where the real story begins to get fascinating. Chapter 3. Operation Concerto. The identification of Tariq al-Rifi as a priority target began with a Mossad analyst named Ronit, noticing patterns where others saw only noise. She was reviewing bank reports obtained through European sources when she noticed something strange. Small donations of 500 or 1,000 euros that seemed harmless in isolation, but which multiplied in a suspicious progression, always originating from Vienna. After months of cross-referencing data, intercepting communications, and following digital trails, Mossad finally put a face and name to the ghost. Tariq Mansour al-Rifi, internal codename the Diplomat. As soon as they identified him, one of the most meticulous surveillance operations ever conducted by Israeli intelligence on European soil began. For 3 entire months, a team of 8 agents mapped Tariq's every breath. They discovered he frequented 3 specific cafés in Vienna, always on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That he visited the Floridsdorf Mosque on Fridays. That he held meetings in 5-star hotels disguised as social dinners. And the detail that would change everything. He had a genuine passion for classical music, especially opera. Tariq religiously attended concerts at the Vienna State Opera, Mahler, Wagner, Mozart. For Mossad, this was gold. A predictable pattern, a public but controllable location, a routine he would never break because deep down he felt completely safe. An agent named Anna, an Israeli with a perfect German passport, infiltrated as a musicology student and managed to bump into him twice at cultural events, gaining enough trust to map even the routes he used returning home. But operating in Austria was like walking a tightrope over a diplomatic abyss. Attempts to capture Tariq alive and extradite him to Israel were exhaustively discussed in Tel Aviv, but all simulations reached the same conclusion: impossible. He had people under constant surveillance, cars with trained drivers, multiple pre-established escape routes, and political connections that could alert him to any suspicious movement. Only one option remained: surgical elimination. Quick, silent, leaving no trace. The logistics were planned with Swiss watchmaker precision. A team of 4 agents with specific roles: an elite sniper from Sayeret Matkal positioned 180 meters away, an observer, Anna, to confirm visual identity, 2 cover agents to secure escape routes. The weapon chosen was a rifle with a customized suppressor capable of virtually silent firing. Each agent would have a separate escape route: airport, train to Munich, car to the Italian border, to minimize chances of joint capture. The location chosen was no accident: the exit of the Vienna State Opera, where crowds, movement, and relative darkness would create the perfect environment. The October night of 1994 began like any other for Tariq. He put on his favorite Italian suit and left for the State Opera. Operation Concerto was in its final minutes of preparation. The sniper had been positioned for 2 hours. Anna sat 3 rows behind Tariq, confirming his every move. When the orchestra's last notes echoed and applause erupted, Tariq stood up, satisfied, without the slightest idea his life was being timed down to the second. He descended the marble steps surrounded by hundreds of elegant people. And that's when something inside him triggered an instinctive alarm, perhaps a 6th sense that keeps dangerous men alive. But Tariq sensed danger. In a sudden impulse, he changed direction halfway down the stairs, deviating from the planned route and completely complicating the sniper's angle. Those were critical, agonizing seconds for the Mossad team. The target was moving erratically. The crowd was too dense. A stray shot could hit an innocent Austrian civilian and turn the operation into a diplomatic massacre. Anna, via discreet radio frequency, confirmed visual identity again. "It's him! Confirmed! Target diplomat!" The green light was given when Tariq finally descended the last step and walked toward a side street where fewer people were passing. The first shot cut through the icy air with a muffled sound and hit Tariq in the shoulder instead of the intended target. He didn't fall. He just staggered, confused. For one terrifying instant, it seemed the operation had failed. But the crowd briefly opened a visual corridor between shooter and target, just 2 seconds of a clear window. The second shot was perfect. It pierced the base of Tariq's skull, and he collapsed onto the cobblestones like a puppet with its strings cut. In less than 90 minutes, the entire Mossad team was out of Austria. Surgical precision, clean shot, ghost retreat. Chapter 4. The aftermath. The news of Tariq al-Rifi's death hit Hamas like a silent earthquake. First disbelief, then widespread panic. Officially, the organization declared Tariq a martyr and promised bloody retaliation. But internally, Hamas leadership was in genuine despair for a pragmatic reason. Tariq knew everything. Names of European contacts, bank account numbers in Zurich and Frankfurt, financial triangulation routes, identities of sympathizers infiltrated in universities. He was a living archive of the most sophisticated financial network Hamas had ever built. And now that archive lay dead on a Viennese sidewalk. The rush was immediate. Accounts were emptied. Contacts were warned to disappear. Documents were burned. Operation Concerto hadn't just eliminated a man, it had temporarily decapitated an entire terrorist financing infrastructure. In Vienna, the public reaction was confusion and collective denial. Initially, witnesses believed Tariq had fainted or suffered a heart attack. Only hours later, when Austrian police found multiple false passports, Jordanian, Tunisian, Yemeni, did the gravity explode. Local newspapers went into a frenzy. Who was this man? Why did he have 3 identities? The Austrian government, realizing the diplomatic bomb it held, opted for strategic silence and temporary classification of the case. A thorough investigation would mean admitting Vienna had become a terrorist financing hub, destroying the image of sacred neutrality the country had cultivated since World War II. The solution was a political compromise, officially classify the death as a possible settling of scores between radical groups and avoid mentioning Israel or Mossad at all costs. Israel maintained Mossad's standard protocol, neither confirm nor deny. Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin's cabinet remained officially aloof. But behind the scenes in international intelligence circles, everyone knew exactly what had happened. The message was crystal clear. Israeli counterintelligence had crossed a line few imagined would be crossed. The European press took less than 48 hours to start pointing fingers directly at Tel Aviv. Austrian and French newspapers published speculative but well-founded headlines attributing the execution to Mossad. The Times suggested the operation may have had discreet cooperation from European agencies. An explosive theory implying some governments allowed Israel to do the dirty work they didn't have courage to do themselves. The ethical and legal debate that followed was fascinating and divisive. Critics classified the case as clear extrajudicial execution. Tariq hadn't been tried, had no right to defense, and was simply eliminated in a unilateral decision by a foreign state. But defenders argued with an uncomfortable question. If Austria knew Tariq was financing terrorist attacks and never acted, who really violated ethical principles first? The immediate tactical effects were like a financial earthquake. In the first 72 hours after Vienna, 12 bank accounts in 3 countries were frozen. Front cultural associations closed their doors overnight. The network Tariq had built collapsed almost instantly. According to leaked Israeli intelligence reports, Hamas had to postpone or cancel at least 6 planned operations in following months simply because they had no cash on hand. But Hamas is resilient. In following years, they rebuilt financial routes in a more fragmented, decentralized way. Instead of one Tariq centralizing operations, they had dozens of small operators moving smaller amounts. Confidence in Europe as a safe haven was permanently shaken. Hamas financial agents now operated with constant paranoia, living as fugitives even in neutral countries. External repercussions showed how a covert operation can change entire policies. Austria, embarrassed by international exposure, completely revised its banking laws in 1995, increasing transparency and admitting discreet cooperation with foreign intelligence services, including Mossad. Germany tightened controls. Switzerland began relaxing its sacred banking secrecy when terrorism suspicions arose. What years of diplomacy failed to achieve, a single clandestine operation accomplished, forcing Europe to wake up to the fact its neutrality was being exploited. Ironically, Tariq died trying to prove Europe was an untouchable sanctuary, and his death was precisely what destroyed that sanctuary forever. The Vienna operation entered strategy manuals as a perfect example that vulnerability is universal. It became part of Mossad's operational DNA, incorporated into internal training as a mandatory case study. The message running through generations of Israeli spies is crystal clear. When diplomacy fails, when foreign governments refuse to act, there is a final tool, and that tool can be used anywhere on the planet. But the great moral question remains. Was it legitimate preventive justice, or simply revenge disguised as strategic operation? Was it violation of international law or necessary action that saved Israeli lives? There is no easy answer, no moral consensus. And perhaps this uncomfortable ambiguity is precisely the point. The war on terror takes place in a gray area where traditional rules simply don't apply. So answer me in the comments. Do you think operations like Vienna are necessary justice or unacceptable violations of international law? Where do you draw the line? I want real debate because these questions don't have easy answers. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe now and activate the notification bell. See you in the next video.